y'all doing?
Doing well.
Have y'all enjoyed the flow and the program so far?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, we are tasked with these amazing panelists here to discuss our neighborhoods and our health. This is going to be a discussion about the current state of our neighborhoods and how environmental racism is increasing negative impacts to our health and to our well-being. My name is Fanika Miller, and my panelists here, Dr. Angelica Jeter, who is the founder and CEO of Impactful Collaboration. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Awesome. Miss Kiana Jones, a local community leader, and Miss Ann Oradeco, who is an attorney and an activist. And so I will give each of you a minute to kind of introduce yourselves deeper, to talk about your work, 1 minute, and then we will dive into the conversation. So we'll start with you, Miss Oradeco, Attorney Oradeco.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. How's everyone feeling today? Good. Nice. Thank you so much to Clark Atlanta, and thank you, Rep. Shannon, for putting together this panel. As was stated, my name is Ann Oradeco. I'm an attorney with the Legal Defense Fund, and I have been working on issues around race and criminalization, as well as race and its impacts on communities of color for several years now. I don't know if you want a whole litany of work I've done, but just to give you a little primer, that's my framework and how I approach this issue. So thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to be here, y'all. I'm so excited. The AUC has a special place in my heart. Again, I'm Dr. Angelica Jeter. I served as Chief Health Officer of Atlanta in the Bottoms administration. I was responsible for protecting the health of nearly 500,000 residents in coordination with Mayor Bottoms and her team. I am a 20-year equity scientist and researcher, and I have been really using data to tell the story of my community. And so I'm excited to dive deeper into this conversation. I speak from a health and public health lens. I'm happy to add value wherever I can.
Hello, everybody. My name is Reverend Kiana Jones. I serve as the activist pastor in residence at Park Avenue Baptist Church here in Atlanta, Georgia. I am also an environmental justice and racial justice organizer and activist, and I just do all the things that I can here in Atlanta.
Awesome. Y'all give them a quick hand clap. This is amazing. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to moderate this panel. My day job is I am one of the national field co-directors at Black Voters Matter Fund. And so we get the opportunity to work with amazing activists and leaders like Ms. Kiana at the end, but also get to guide and inform the environmental and healthcare buckets of work. And so we know the impact that it has on Black communities across the state and just across our country. So first question, and we'll just go down the line here. Please define for the audience what environmental racism and environmental justice looks like from a policy perspective.
Sure. So I think oftentimes when people talk about environmental justice or any issues around environmental rights, people oftentimes see in their mind like a hippie white person demanding to hug the trees, right? Which that image in itself is a problem because oftentimes those people have a much deeper analysis of the problems that we're dealing with. However, when we talk about, at least in this country, and you can also see this globally, environmental injustice impacts communities of color and people in the global south at a higher rate than other communities across the world. We honestly are the people dealing with the brunt of industrialization and the harms that it's made on our planet. And so when you think about environmental justice, I really encourage people to broaden our spectrum on what we imagine what the problems or what the solutions look like, right? Here in Atlanta, we talk about issues around how our communities are set up, how our communities are pushed to the margins. Even when we talk about issues like Cop City, which those of us on the panel who've worked on it, a lot of times people frame these issues either around economic access or frame these issues around policing or frame these issues in ways that kind of silo these problems, but they're all interconnected, they're interlocking, and they create a web. And so a great example, outside of like modern examples, we can look at how our interstate system was built in this city, right? Like the downtown connector is an environmental justice issue. We frame it around talking about how our communities were broken apart, how it essentially destroyed our economic opportunities because communities that had an economic flow were broken apart and then forced into this system of highways that disconnects them. But we don't talk about the environmental impact that had on those same communities. So when you look at like Mechanicsville, when you look at Summer Hill, when you look at Sweet Auburn, all of those communities have environmental health issues based off of that high pollution coming from the highway, right? All of those communities are then pushed into industrial waste coming back and forth, right? And then you see it push out from there. So you look at South Fulton, you look at other areas where Black people are crowded and pushed into. What is built around our neighborhoods? What are the things that they think is fine to put in our neighborhoods? So when we think about environmental justice, we can't just think about the immediate issue of are we cutting a tree down or not. We have to actually think about what infrastructure, what is being built, what types of factories, what types of things are being put in our communities, and how is that impacting us, right? I want to make sure I don't overtalk because I'm a lawyer and we can talk, so I'm going to pass. I have more to say, but
I love it. I love it. I'm like, yes, there you go. That sounds right. I think that I can add a little bit to what's been said, because the reality is that it's all that and so much more. I think that part of this is thinking about what's intentional and unintentional, what policies are being put into place and then avoided, neglected, what communities are being targeted, prioritized, or under-prioritized. It's really the clear understanding of the systems that are at play, who's making decisions, who has a seat at that table, who's having to create their own table and build their own chair and pull up their own seat as it relates to the decisions around policy making and implementing those policies. I was listening to a couple of podcasts on the way here about some health problems in my home city. I'm from Jackson, Mississippi. So many people have heard about the Jackson water crisis, and thinking about my friends and family members that were directly impacted by those things. I think the reality is that there are policies and practices that could have been put into place to protect the health of our residents, but that didn't happen. So when you think about all of these factors, that is environmental racism and that is environmental justice, getting to the end goal of providing safety, well-being, health, and other resources that we want to put into place so we can have productive and long lives. That's what we're really talking about when we have this conversation.
Yeah, like so much has already been said, and still there's just a little bit more to even add to this, because for me, what environmental racism and environmental justice look like here in the city of Atlanta, in the state of Georgia in 2024 is the city council and mayor of the city of Atlanta, backed by the governor and the state legislature, cutting down 381 acres of forest land in a Black community, destroying and further polluting the South River, which is the second most polluted body of water in the United States already. And what that looks like is the perpetuation of extractive colonialism through policies that do not protect us by having super, super low standards when it comes to water quality. The fact that the silt runoff in the South River right now is out of control, so much so that Fox News even cares, but we're still talking about a training facility, right? What that looks like also is the fact that planning, zoning, land use laws are a further perpetuation of redlining, and it's legal redlining, honestly, and it allows for environmental racism to take place in favor of gentrification. So what these policy issues look like are really just a perpetuation and proliferation of racialized capitalism to Black people.
Come on, sisters. Just drop the mic almost, right? Amazing, right? Okay, I'm gonna go on to the next question, and I won't inject myself into it, but I do want us to be able to have a conversation. There were so many finger snaps, so many things that you all dropped around that, the highway system, the environmental, just the pollution, the things that Black and brown communities are facing every day, and how these things are all aligned and connected, right? So it's not just one thing, it's systems on top of systems on top of systems that are really impacting our communities in a negative way. And I think for us and for you all and in the work that we all do, we have to figure out how to make it as plain as possible so everybody can get it, right? So how we can name a thing an environmental injustice for our communities writ large. Sometimes we are thinking about the highway systems, but we're not thinking about what we're breathing. We're not thinking about the arsenic in the railroad tracks and where those are in proximity to Black communities. So thank y'all. Okay, number 2. I'm very animated and I'm a little fun, y'all. So this may not be your traditional panel, okay? Not your traditional moderator. All right. Please tell us how the refusal to address climate change directly with policy changes will have specific impacts for Black communities in the South, and give us recent examples of these impacts. And I'll start with you, Reverend Jones.
Yeah, I'm going to say that when you talk about the refusal to address environmental impacts, we can look at Cop City and we can say, hey, this is a historically Black neighborhood in Southeast Atlanta, in Southwest DeKalb County, that has also been historically neglected by the city of Atlanta. And every time the city of Atlanta wants to do something in this community, it shows up in the form of policing. And policing right now is the biggest threat to our environment. What people don't understand is that when you're looking at these tanks that we're getting from the military, from their surplus, think about what went into making that tank. Think about what it's doing to the infrastructure as they roll along residential streets, right? When that tank is passing by McNair Senior High School on Boulder Crest, what's happening to the road? And when that road is crumbling, what's happening as it runs off into the South River watershed, which is vital for DeKalb County? And then what's happening as the methane gas from the landfills that are no longer in use, when that methane gas is running into the water system, coupled with the lead that's already there, and the children who go to the school are drinking this water, and our children so-called don't perform as well on these standardized tests, but we know the effects of lead poisoning to the development of young children and older children, and then couple that with the noise pollution that's coming from the firing range that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Do you know what happens when you constantly hear noise? You can't think straight. That goes to critical thinking. How are we supposed to perform on a standardized test if we can't even think because we jumping every time we hear a loud noise? And why is it okay for my Black son Daniel to hear that shit and the white Daniel ain't hearing it over there on the north side? So that's what it looks like for me.
All right.
Oh, can we curse in here? Somebody tell me the protocol, because I curse a lot. It's bad.
Somebody grab the plate. All right. Do you all have anything to add to that? Yes, please weigh in.
First off, yes to everything. Reverend Kiana is always on point. But I will also add, just pointing to the fact that we're already seeing the impacts of this. Yeah. Like, people who live around Cop City, just the last time we had heavy rains, had flooding around the area, which was the first time that we've dealt with flooding around the area. Y'all in the AUC, you just saw your sisters over at Spelman dealing with this. What we're seeing is our infrastructure not being able to meet the needs of our future and our present, because we are dealing with now historic levels of things at all times, and we are actively undermining our globe, our planet's ability to deal with that, right? And so one of the biggest concerns I think about often when I think about climate change in the South, especially for Black people in the South, we have been dealing with record heat in the South. Many folks in rural areas, like those of us in Atlanta, most of us live in communities where we have access to air conditioning, where we have access to our vehicles to be able to get away from the heat. Those of our family and friends who are out in rural parts of Georgia who do not have that same access, that's life-threatening. We're talking about heat that kills, right? We're talking about the ways in which we're now dealing with hurricanes that are, like, when we saw what happened with Hurricane Katrina, that is now something that we're seeing commonly happen to our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, to our folks on the Gulf, and now we're dealing with our own issues of environmental strangeness that we are just writing off, right? Just in 2023, we had tornadoes hit in January in Atlanta. anyone from here knows that is not when we have ever dealt with tornadoes. That's not tornado season for us.
Nope.
Snow in Atlanta, record snow in Atlanta. So we're talking about communities, our communities, which have already dealt with, as we say, compounded issues that ensure that we have less access to things. So when you now have a hurricane and people are told that they need to leave the area, and you are a single mom with 3 kids and you have no family support, you don't have a car, you're relying on public transit, how the hell are you supposed to get out and save your family? When there's heat index telling you that it's not safe for you to just be outside in the climate that your people have always lived in, how are you supposed to deal with that? What are the answers for that? And our politicians are refusing to actually address these things because sadly, we're under a state of corporate capture.
Yes.
Money is controlling our politics, and the same people with the money that's controlling our politics are the same people who are putting our environment, our globe, in danger by building this endless need to consistently grow capitalism at the stake of everyone else. And Black communities, we're the first ones to feel it, right? Under our racial capitalism structure, Black people are designated as people who are always ripe for exploitation, which means our communities are the first ones to be attacked. And so when we allow for this idea of a cop city to be built because it brings you safety, when we know what actually brings us safety is making sure our schools are well funded, making sure people have access to healthcare, actually keeping people out of incarceration, because if we're talking about health, the health disparities of people who've been incarcerated are out of this world. It is a slow death that we put people through when we incarcerate them for dumb things like low-level acts, right? Low-level crimes. All of these things impact our health, impact our resilience when this climate disaster that we're all facing starts to hit us at home. And so my biggest fear, looking at how the climate is shifting, is how can we create things outside of the state to ensure that Black people have access and are able to stay safe, because our politicians are not standing up for us in this moment.
Yes.
So the piece, y'all are amazing. This is so good. The piece that I would add to this is thinking about conversations around redlining, and we've mentioned, it's been mentioned a couple of times, but when you think about the historical context of redlining and the impacts of it, it goes way beyond anything that researchers, politicians, even some corporate leaders have even thought about. So when we think about redlining, and we think about the health consequences, and if you sit back and you look at even COVID infection rates, you sit back and you look at certain health disparities, breast cancer, infant mortality, maternal mortality, all of these factors that we're seeing that's decreasing our longevity of our health, it goes back to one factor around redlining. And this, we see that this increase around climate change and these factors around just raining and how much flooding is happening here for Black and brown communities, especially those that experience redlining. It's a 40% increase in flooding, which you mentioned, which I'm so glad you did. But what are the health impacts that we're seeing? I am a person who has asthma. My asthma was worse when I lived closer to the highway. I am someone who has had multiple issues around certain aspects of heart disease and risk for stroke. And a lot of that is associated with the environments that I was living in. I want us to even think about environments beyond the physical and built environment, but also our social and economic environments and our ecological environments. There are a lot of factors at play that we don't really consider, and all of it impacts our health, but it's all interconnected. If we think about the layers of our lived experience, we have to identify the key things that promote justice within our conversations. I think it's very easy for us to highlight many of these problems, and that is essential. I really am excited about the part in our conversation where we get into the solutions around seeking justice. And so that piece, especially around redlining, because it's the map that shows us where the impact is going to happen the most, especially for us that work in health and public health. We don't have to wait for a disaster. We know where we need to be putting our efforts. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you all for those responses. Very, very, very powerful. This one I think is really important because, again, when people think about environmental justice and climate change, a lot of our black communities typically just, sometimes we're not even gonna fool with that. Those are tree huggers and, all of those things. But how do we bridge the gap between the public perception of environmental justice and its real impact on black communities? Like, can you all name some of the things that people don't think are an environmental injustice as you respond to that as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think that when we look, as we have all stated, through a lens of intersectionality and not looking at the things that affect us in silos, you cannot talk about environmental justice without talking about reproductive justice. We're not talking about reproductive justice if we're not talking about child care and health care. We're not talking about health care if we're not talking about economic justice. So all of the things that we stand up for, all the things that concern us, that affect the way we live our lives day to day, go into thinking about what environmental justice really means. And when you think about it from a perspective of a black person, and I can just think about myself, thinking about, as was stated in the previous panel for black women, that generational trauma from slavery. As black women, even when we think about land, what does land represent to us? What type of pain do we feel when we think about what our ancestors went through trying to till that land and make it produce for massa? And what happened when they didn't do what massa expected? That's pain. So why would I initially, as a black woman, want to go out there and worry about a land? Because right now I can only think about what the land can do for me because it took so much from me. Now I have to get what I can get from that land. So many times we grow up in a way where we're thinking about how to live off of the land rather than living with the land, but that is extractive settler colonialism, but we're indoctrinated into it because look where we live. Look how we got here. Look how we've been treated here. So if you think about making environmental justice matter to people and going beyond that stigma of the hippie tree hugger, we have to go back to helping people understand what all of this means for how we live day to day, how this affects reproductive justice, how this affects economic justice, how this affects environmental justice connecting to healthcare. If you think about Cop City, because y'all know that is my thing, right? Cop City, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, all of these things that affect us in a really, really bad way. But the mayor of the city of Atlanta is willing to throw millions into that. But how many hospitals have closed on the South Side? We're not interested in the city of Atlanta in making sure that we have adequate health care, but we want to make sure there's plenty of police. Doing what? Surveilling our children, watching us. Like, the city of Atlanta is the most surveilled city in the United States. And what happens when you couple that with police in our schools and the things that our children already deal with? We are actively teaching our children that they're never viewed as innocent ever. So why should they care about the environment? Because we're not even taking care of their basic needs, because that speaks to mental health. What our children think about themselves as they're growing, how they value each other, and how they value this land and what it means to them. So I really do believe that if we keep the conversation a very intersectional conversation, then we can always bring it back around to environmental justice is racial justice.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that, unfortunately, most of us don't realize the impact of environmental racism and even the importance of environmental justice until it slaps us in the face. Yes. Until something happens to where we are robbed of something that we need, and it comes from the world around us. I think that the reality is that I really wish this room was full of people, because this is probably one of the most impactful conversations that will carry people for generations. And the lessons that will come out of this discussion and that people will walk away with has the ability to promote longevity for all of us. For me, I keep thinking about going back to what happened to my parents, my friends, my family members in the Jackson water crisis. And the reality is that when you don't know when you'll have water, when you have to boil your water, you don't know if you boiled it long enough, you have to wait for water bottles to arrive, you don't know when you'll be able to flush your toilet or take a bath. and you're thinking about drinking contaminated water and brushing your teeth with that water, and how it affects your health long term or even in the short term. There are people who had skin infections, they lost their hair, they were poisoned with lead, they had all kinds of long-term effects of their health they're still wrestling with. The water is on, but the crisis is still happening. Yes. And then no one talks about the stress of environmental racism and the reality that when you think about how stress exacerbates illness and impacts our health, we can't measure or quantify what environmental racism has taken away from us.
That's right.
But what we can do is have these conversations to promote awareness and get to those solutions and bring more people, especially the folks who are in this room, to the table. So I love this. My heart is like pounding out of my chest because I love this. I'm so happy to be up here with y'all.
I mean, I think there's so much that you guys spoke on that is like making things percolate in my mind. And something that both of you guys are talking about, especially thinking about the generational impact of the violence of colonialism and how it has stripped so many of us Black people across the globe from our indigenous understandings of how to interact with the planet, how to interact with the land, and how I do think so many of us have been feeling this call to reconnect to the land. And I feel like that is a place where there is a source of sustenance. There's a place for us to start to heal. And I think it's important that we support people who are leading that work, right? And do so in a way that rejects the colonial extraction process of interacting with the land. So when you see things like black farmers, collectives popping up, and CSAs, and ways in which people are working with the land to feed us, their people, with healthy food, with food that they're taking and building and growing in a way that is in response, that is responsive to the land, but also it's sustainable, right? Because we look at how factory farming is destroying our land, right? We look at how corporations literally do not know how to function in the world without destroying whatever it touches. And then we look at small farmers, and we have a duty to start to try to work within our communities and sustain things that reflect our indigenous ways, right? Our ways of being able to interact with the planet that is in harmony, because we as humans are supposed to be in harmony, and right now we're so disconnected. And as Black people, I think because of how we were either stripped from each other by being kidnapped and forced onto this place, or like me, a recent immigrant, my parents came to this country, we were forced off of our lands because of the ways in which capitalism has destroyed our own structures of government, has fed us our own poison. All of us are suffering across the Atlantic, and we do have a duty to try to start to heal that pain, to heal that pain with each other, to heal that pain with the land.
Powerful, powerful, powerful. Highlight bills. That's an environmental injustice. Right? We talk about utilities justice, right? We talk about utility companies and corporations taking advantage when we had one of the hottest summers and seasons on record. And you know that those rate increases are coming, right? It looks like going down to a Southwest Georgia and an Albany where utility bills can be upwards of $800 a month sometimes. Right? How do we connect these things back to who is in the position of power and who pulls the lever of power? And then how do we hold those folks accountable? Food insecurity. We talked about Black farmers. We've got Dollar General markets everywhere. But how many Black farmers have fresh produce in those Dollar General markets? Right? How many of us deal with food apartheid, not just food insecurity, right? Where you just can't get it in your hospitals. How many of our HBCUs and students who are on college campuses across rural Georgia, in the Black Belt, and other places, there's a closed hospital, and what if something happens to one of those students on campus and you can't get there, right? And you're experiencing environmental issues, the lead in the water, the neurotoxins in the water that have an impact on Black maternal health, right? You're taking a shower in the water in Jackson. You know, not only are you drinking that, but eczema. How many of us are dealing with eczema, psoriasis, skin conditions? when you're brushing your teeth with those things. So it's so many ways that all of these things are connected. Amazing. We have one more question, but I want y'all to take y'all time with it, okay? Please tell us what you believe are the current top environmental threats as it relates to our communities, and you've talked about quite a few of those. And then how can the audience take action, and what can they do to help advocate?
Well, I believe the top environmental threat is militarization. Militarization and over-policing. Because when you look at what is taking place all over this country, not just in Atlanta, in at least 30 other states, they are looking to build cop cities. But when they do this, what do they have to do? Where do they want to put them? They're coming into black communities and destroying the natural resources. They're coming into black communities and they are adding even more pollutants and free radicals to the air that we breathe, to the water that we drink. They're coming and they're taking away, we talked about record heat. 381 acres of tree canopy was taken from the city of Atlanta. That's why it's so damn hot at times. Because you literally took away the largest urban forest in the southeastern United States, which was right here in the city of Atlanta, in a black community that has not been overrun by gentrification. So when you think about what it is that we're doing, they want to build in that space a mock city for urban warfare training. What does it take to build that? What are our children breathing? There are 2 schools that sit on either side of that land where they want to build Cop City, and there are 2 juvenile jails right behind it. What are these children drinking in the water? What are they breathing in the air? What are they hearing in the air? But then what are parents dealing with as a result of this, right? And all of this is coming from the militarization of our police force. Having to have a burn tower in the neighborhood, what good is that gonna do? This is a threat because you're gonna practice chemical warfare also. All of this stuff is going into the air. But then we look at the equipment that the military is using. When you see police officers in Atlanta these days, they look like they're in the military because they got gas masks on their hips, they're carrying ARs, they have SWAT gear on. I mean, it's really ridiculous the way they're looking and the way they're over-militarizing police. But what that does to the environment is horrendous because you're extracting natural resources, then you're taking away the things that really give health and life to our communities. By taking away 381 acres of forest land in DeKalb County now does not have any access to the largest swath of forest. What do we have? When we talk about the mental health effects of being in right relationship with the environment, when you can go for a walk in that tree canopy, when you can sit down next to a stream, when you can be one with nature and understand how the land nurtures and nourishes your children, how your children can know the benefits of being able to hug a tree. I actually do invite you all to hug a tree and see what it does for you. I invite you to just put your bare feet on the ground, touch the ground, put your ear to the ground, literally, and see what you feel, see what you hear, see what it does to you mentally. That is health for us. But to take it away is detrimental to us. And in too many places across this country, we are doing it because we want to militarize police. When we look at the people of West Virginia up in Appalachia, they are fighting against the Mountain Valley Pipeline. There are so many people in one neighborhood who have died from cancer because of working on the Mountain Valley Pipeline. The Mountain Valley Pipeline is another source of resources for products that would flow, that would aid in the production of military equipment. When we talk about these things, we have to stop talking about them like they're individual issues that don't connect. We have to keep intersectionality as a part of the conversation. And I would encourage everyone to, one, learn about what these COP cities are and what they mean for the environment. There is a great article out, and you can just Google like COP cities USA, and it'll actually show you all the places where they want to put up COP cities, like Newark, New Jersey, that is heavily, heavily black, right? Baltimore, heavily, heavily black. Every place that you'll see, heavily, heavily black populations, but they want to destroy the environment. I encourage you to look up GILEE, the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, that talks about the militarization of police right here in Georgia, what that means for us. Many of us are passionate about a ceasefire in Palestine. Well, when you think about it, in Israel, they got a little COP city that they call Little Gaza. Where do you think we got the idea? Because the Israeli occupation forces, through GILEE, train our officers right here. Militarization is indeed an environmental threat.
And I would also say, with the way that policing is becoming highly militarized, and we're talking about holding people in power accountable, I think we should have a real moment of clarity to think about what does it look like with a military police force combating people who are saying they are demanding more from their elected officials. As we see climate change start to really impact communities and people become desperate and demand resources, demand accountability, y'all think the police who have now been militarized and have tanks and are training in mock cities are going to give you flowers? No. They are going to be doing exactly what we see happening globally, what we see in Gaza, what we see across the globe. Expect that to be coming home. That's the plan, right? And so if we have a shot at correcting the problems that we're seeing, these interlocking problems that we're seeing, and we're going to try to fight back against these systems that are trying to silence us, we need to be fighting back against police militarization. We need to be fighting back against all of our funds going to policing. Like we just talked about hospitals closing in this very city while they are spending millions of dollars to build something that we genuinely don't need, right? When we look at how we value what is important to our communities, and policing becomes the biggest siphoning of resources in our cities across this country, and we know that we are seeing changes happening, climate change is happening, we need to be ready to stop this militarization, or we are going to lose this battle before we even start.
I just want to add that, as Ann alluded to, there are so many anti-protest bills that have been passed across this country. And even here in the state of Georgia, last session, it was defeated, but we know that they're going to try to introduce it again. What they have done, though, is expand the RICO statute. They have gone ahead and criminalized bail funds so that if you would be arrested for protesting, anything protest related, anything that expresses dissent in the government or to the government, then they would make it illegal for us, the community, to raise funds to get you out of jail. And how stupid does that sound? How fascistic is that? Like, we are there right now. So it's really important for us also to watch the legislation that passes through, particularly here in the state of Georgia, because they want to pass a bill that would make child labor legal. They have lowered the standards for cosmetology, but there has not been one bill that has passed through this state house this year that addresses clean energy.
That's right. Come on.
There's nothing that I can add to that, y'all. All the things that I would have mentioned have been said on this stage. It's really, for me, about global warming and the impact that it has on our health, deforestation, and how that's interconnected to global warming, and really thinking about our access to clean water and the connection to the land. Those are the things that placate a lot of the conversations that I've been having with so many people. But amen to everything that's been said. There is nothing that I can add to that.
So, making sure that we know and are aware of the issues. Like I always say, we got to be woke and aware, right? We can't just be one or the other. We got to know the issues. We have to be able to assess the landscape. We have to know who pulls the lever of power, understand how these issues intersect and how everything is connected to each other. And then using our voices for good, holding elected officials accountable, because we can't just have people in positions of power who are afraid to also use their power for good, right? Don't get caught up in positional power that we let things slide. And then just making sure that we educate our neighbors. You can lead change from right where you are. You can lead change in your home. You can lead change in your school, on your campus, in your neighborhood, on your block, right? You don't have to have a platform or, a whole bunch of social media followers in order to affect change and to raise awareness around these issues. And then the last thing that I would add before we shout out these sisters and give you all an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have is that we have to figure out how we can tap our communities into this bag of environmental justice that has come down the pipeline. The bill, the IRA, ARPA funds, all of those things that were delivered because Georgians showed up and showed out in 2020, right? We got to make sure that those resources flow into our communities to remediate some of these environmental injustices and environmental harms that are impacting our communities, right? So I want to really thank Attorney Ann Ordeco, Reverend Kiana Jones, Dr. Angelica Jeter for your contributions, for your deep work, your passion around these issues. And then I invite the audience, is there anyone that has any questions that you would like to ask or a follow-up? Oh, come on, sister. How you doing?
Hi, how are you all? This discussion was great. Ms. Kiana, you actually led me here because you pointed out the South Side. I'm from the SWATs as well, and I feel like
Can you speak into the mic?
I'm from the SWATs as well. Born and raised in Southwest Atlanta during the Bill Campbell era.
Oh boy!
All the way to South Fulton.
I don't think the mic is on.
It's not.
Sorry, I'm just tall.
There you go.
Okay.
You brought me here because I was born in the SWATs during the Bill Campbell era, moved to South Fulton before it became the city of South Fulton. Like, I have seen a lot. My mother and grandmother went to Clark College. I went to South Carolina State University, and tying into the redlining and the HBCUs, the zoning policy, just in my 33 years, like, I see the studies, I see people still alive, the documents, even, for instance, like the Howard situation, South Carolina State, all this stuff that we have, this evidence. I guess my question is, could you all walk me through, is a class action suit something that's possible and something that we should have been doing? Because when I think about these things, I'm like, the only way to fight the system is to go through the system. They're going to change the goalpost eventually, but if you play their game, you have to beat the, you know what I'm saying? This is what I've observed in 33 years. So I'm like, is that, it hasn't been done, it hasn't been, is it a community issue that we cannot form together? Is it a money issue because we're not putting our money into these things? Is it not realistic? I just feel like you all have the wherewithal to tell me if this is possible and something that we should be doing, or if it actually does not exist and is not possible. Thank you.
Well, Ann might be able to answer. Well, I'm not even going to say might. Ann can, because Ann can do it all because she does. But as far as the viability of a class action lawsuit, I would defer to Ann to speak to that. But as far as just doing it to do it, yes, do it. Get these suckers' attention. Let them know that y'all understand how you have been disenfranchised, and now you understand that you have avenues to fight back. Nothing happens if we don't do anything. And I think it's important to raise that you are aware of what redlining has done to your community and how that has affected you and your health, what that means when Dr. Angelica was living closer to railroad tracks and her asthma was worse. I'm sure that those things you can see. So when we think about that, even looking at zoning and planning and land use laws, I look at East Atlanta Village, where I'm from, and I remember when I was growing up in East Atlanta Village, there were pretty much two zoning designations. It was either residence zone for homes or business. Now you have all of these mixed use designations. The variances are coming out the wazoo. Those things are done by design because they don't want there to be anything when it's only black people living there in those residences. But once white people start to come back, now they got to be able to live, work, and play all in the same area. They get to have a health clinic downstairs in the buildings that they are building for them. But we can't even have a hospital on Cleveland Avenue. Like, this is an issue. I would definitely encourage you to get with your community and take whatever legal action you all would deem necessary, because even if the state would say you can't sue the state, so what? Now people are aware, and now people are going to move to try to do other things that would prevent this from happening to others.
Yeah, and just speaking on the whole issue of the class action, if it's viable, I mean, look, you can sue whoever, right? Like, you've heard of all sorts of crazy lawsuits. I do want to caution people, though, because one of my fears as an attorney, especially when Black folks are doing movement work, is that we jump in, we say we're going to sue, and we siphon off energy from the movement itself. And I do want to be very mindful of the fact that a lawsuit is just a tool of many tools to be able to get us closer to what it looks like for us to be free in these lands, right? And so, yes, let's sue, but also, like, the lawsuit is in the background, right? What are the goals of the lawsuit? Is it getting discovery so you can actually start to air these people out, right? Or are you suing because your goal is to get notoriety? Your goal is to make sure it's being seen? Because in the real context of the courts we're dealing with, Trump did a number on the federal courts. Let's be really real. And so we are looking at a Supreme Court that just put out a ruling that I think many of y'all notice around whether Colorado, a state, can actually decide who is a fit candidate, right? So I don't trust that these courts are going to get us to freedom, but they can be one of the many tools we use in our communities to be able to fight against these systems of oppression. And so, yes, we can sue. Does suing need to be our main line of defense or offense? No, and it should never be, because we have way more power within our own communities, and we should defer to that power first.
Oh, that brings me to
40
one more
seconds.
thing. I'm sorry that I forgot. Open records requests, make use of them. You can get all the documentation that you want to be able to prove what's been done in your community.
Did you? All right. We have 40 seconds.
Oh, gosh.
And one more,
okay.
so 2 more
talk
minutes,
real
and then we'll
quick.
be off stage. Oh, we do? Okay.
Okay,
All right.
okay.
I was going to try to stick with what you said now.
And I won't use it up. I won't use it up, ladies. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the conversation. I came up here because I'm from San Francisco. I am from a area and a place, Hunters Point, San Francisco, because the question that was asked about lawsuits, Hunters Point, San Francisco, was a place during the 40s where the naval yards, the atomic waste from the naval shipyards, were landed along Hunters Point, and the soil not only became contaminated then with radioactive waste, it is still contaminated to this day. The lawsuit that happened, it happened as a group of lawyers, so the community was sick, the community is sick, and the sickness was cancer. I just lost a god brother last week who died from cancer, lived in Hunters Point, and the statistics of, and I'm just going to throw these stats out. Let's just pretend the stats are 1 in every 10 people, sort of generationally, will have cancer. And Hunters Point, San Francisco is living proof of that. The EPA, what they've done, and I'm sure you're familiar with, even in the West End with the soil contamination, is that they are declared a Superfund site. And so that gives the EPA this strategy to clean up over time, test and retest. And so to the point of what is it we want, you know, if we sue, and we know it's not going to repair, unfortunately, all the losses, all the health losses. And we are glad that it's been years they've been cleaning up and testing that soil, but those families are dying off, and then gentrification is taking its place, and so capitalism is lying right on top of all that radioactive soil there. And so the process is one in which, you know, the lawsuits are there, but we know it is still a battle there on the West Coast, and it just reminds me of then what the other cities are up against.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for being here today. My question specifically is, what organizations do you know doing or involved in work to fight against that Atlanta highway capping project?
We saw what happened and what's happening as far as gentrification with the Beltline, with the number of housing, low-income housing that got moved out and all that stuff. And I can only see that continuing and being accelerated with a project like that, as wonderful as it looks on paper. What organizations do you know that are involved, I guess, with making sure that we don't get the short end of the stick with that kind of project again? Thank you.
I actually don't know of any specifically that are involved, and that is a very good question. Like, who is actually doing something? But I don't know of any organizations. I know individuals who are very much interested in combating that, but no organizations. If I had to name one off the top of my head, I would say that probably the Housing Justice League is looking into that, but no organizations that I know of definitively.
Which I had the same thought, and I think if you are inspired, this is a moment of claiming power within yourself to formulate and gather people to do this, right? Like, we are our own answers. We are our own saviors. And so, please, I would love to connect with you to learn more and even figure out more people who would want to join you in that push.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions? Y'all give these panelists an amazing round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.